You're listening to Ordinary Eccentrics. I'm Courtney Lofton, and together we'll uncover the extraordinary lives of ordinary people. Let's hop into it. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Andrea. How are you?
I'm good, Courtney. I'm a little nervous, but I'm excited to kind of see what this is all about.
Yeah, well, it's really all about you. And so I'm just going to jump right in and I'll ask you to introduce yourself, starting with your first and last name.
Okay, my name is Andrea Smith.
And where were you born and raised?
I was born just south of Seattle, Washington, in a city called Byron. And I I grew up there in the same house. My parents still live there. And then I did move away to college, but now I live back in a similar area, about 10 minutes away from where I grew up.
Oh, cool. I was just talking about the Pacific Northwest. Someone was traveling throughout the United States, and I was like, you gotta go to Oregon and Washington. Like, it's some of the most beautiful places I've ever seen.
Yeah, I'm glad you say that because we get kind of a bad rap for it's dark and rainy, but I think that's beautiful too. But we have a lot of other great things about this area. So
what was it like growing up in is it Oregon?
no, it's Washington.
Washington? Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Just south of Seattle. So
okay.
Around the airport, kind of. What was it like? I had a very pleasant childhood, and I grew up in a house with two parents that are still together today. I have a lot of fond memories of my childhood. Like it's a pleasant memory to think about growing up. I grew up with an older brother. We're about 18 months apart. And so it was the four of us living in a house that's, not tiny, but not huge either. But I had my own room. I don't ever remember feeling like there wasn't something, like I was wanting for something I didn't get. So I know now that I lived a very privileged childhood. And I feel like our family was very close, the four of us, but also I had, two sets of grandparents. And then that kind of expanded to have even more grandparents because of divorce and remarrying of my grandparents. So I always had grandparents at my events, and our aunts and uncles were around, and cousins as well. So yeah, cool. I don't know if that's
you. So you had most of your family and your extended family all in that area in Oregon, Washington.
In Washington. Sorry. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, most of our family at that kind of my growing up years lived in Washington somewhere. Maybe not right there, but most of our family lived in Washington at that time.
That's nice. And would you say you're from sort of a smaller town, or was it like a suburb of Seattle?
It's a suburb of Seattle. I mean, it would take 15 minutes to get from my parents' house to downtown. So I would say I grew up in Seattle because, yeah, I mean, when we go out to dinner, we go to Seattle or things like that. So I think it is a suburb of Seattle. So I do think Burien and the surrounding area kind of, when I was growing up, had a small town feel a little bit. Mm-hmm. And now I live about 15 minutes from where I grew up, but I can still pretty much go anywhere in Burien and I will run into somebody I know.
Yeah. No, that's a lot like how the town that I grew up in was. I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't close to any big cities though. The closest city was Chicago, which is like 3 hours away. But
Okay.
for me, I was like always like getting out was always like the goal because
Mm-hmm.
I like when you do see someone everywhere you go, you're just like, I'm like I felt restless. Did you
Mm.
ever feel like that or like did you feel pretty content with where you lived and your life and everything?
Yeah. I would say that when I was deciding where to go to college, that was a factor. Like I
Hmm.
had been accepted to multiple colleges and, you know, one was on the other side of the state. And so I kind of narrowed it down to two, one on the other side of the state in Spokane, Washington, so
Hmm.
considered Eastern Washington, and then one in Seattle. Um, and so that's kind of how I made my decision that I wanted to go somewhere outside of Seattle, but I didn't necessarily want to live in Spokane. So,
Right.
but I think, it came down to, yeah, I wanted to have a little bit of distance from my family to figure out who I was, that kind of
Right.
18-year-old self that's like, let me spread my wings a little bit. So,
Right.
yeah.
And so what was it like spreading your wings? Did you end up going to Spokane or did you go to Seattle?
I did go to school in Spokane at a
Okay.
university called Whitworth. And so it was a private, at that point, it was a college, and now it's a little bigger. So it's a university, but a private
Hmm.
Christian based
Hmm.
college. And when I was in high school, I got really involved in like a local youth group, even though my family didn't go to church very much.
Mm.
I was pretty connected to the youth group, but now when I look back on it, it was mainly just for the social aspect.
Hmm.
Um, and I wasn't super interested in the religious part. So then I went to this, religion based college and felt a little bit uncomfortable when I was first there. I would say the first 2 years, um, because the way that I was starting to view the world was very different from the way I thought a lot of students there were viewing the world.
Hmm.
Um,
Can you
so
talk more about that?
yeah, so um, I haven't thought about that for a long time. So let me think. There was this thing at Whitworth that was like ring by spring, and it was like if you weren't engaged by spring of your senior year, you had like failed your college experience.
Okay.
And it sounds so ridiculous now, as a person in their 40s who's still not married, but I felt ridiculous to me then. Like I looked around, I was like, I don't want to marry any of these dudes. Like I could tell that they wanted a wife so that they could go from having a mom to a wife. And
Hmm.
it was like, I don't want to be tied down to anybody when I graduated and I was 21 when I graduated.
Right.
Um, so I kind
That's
of
a lot
like,
of pressure.
yeah. So things like that. And then it really bothered me. As soon as I moved to Spokane, I started to look around and I was so used to having a very diverse student body in my high school and middle school and elementary school. And I was like,
Hmm.
everybody is white like me in this college.
Hmm.
And it felt very bland. Like there weren't a lot of differing opinions.
Hmm.
Um, and I was used to listening to a lot of differing opinions and being around a lot of people who grew up differently than me. So I really missed that.
Mm.
Even even when we would go, to the movies or when I got a little bit older and like out to bars and stuff, it was just all white people. Um, and so it kind of made me sad because I valued the friends that I had that were people of color, and just being in a city where everybody's is so diverse. So it just felt
Right.
it felt odd to me. Um,
Yeah. Like, wait, something's missing here.
yeah, and like I said, the conversation, like where it started to really hit me was, I would say, my junior and senior year, when you kind of get more into your own path for your
Hmm.
degree, and I went into teaching, and I was like,
Cool.
man, these are just it's all white teachers, and
Yeah.
so I think I was ready to come back to Seattle, not because I wanted to not expand my life beyond where I grew up, but I felt like I wanted to work with the diverse population of students that I grew up with, you know?
Hmm.
I kind of felt a sense of like I want to give back. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, not in like like white savior way, but like I started to see how privileged my life was, and also think that the diverse group of people around me did not have the same privileges. Like it started to sink in college.
Yeah. Did you ever feel pressure to conform in college, like to that mindset or like almost like the safety net of fitting in?
Oh, yes, like 100%. So my freshman year, I hated it. I was like, winter break, I came home and I was like, I'm not going back. I don't want to be
Yeah.
there. And, you know, I was very, very, very homesick. Um, but I think about it now, and I think I wasn't so much homesick as I didn't feel like I could be myself there. Now that
Hmm.
you're saying that, so I felt uncomfortable, and then I to me like, I want you to go back and try again, and you need to go back with a different mindset and stop looking at the negative things and start looking
Hmm.
for positives. And if you want to transfer at the end of the year, we'll talk about it. And so I went back and kind of took my mom's advice and started like meeting new people outside of the school.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and then there was another school close, another university, Gonzaga's close. So I started kind of hanging out with people there and just, you know, making my way through. Um, and then I think when I moved off campus, my junior year is when I started to feel like I could explore who I was outside of that
Hmm.
college experience.
Yeah. I imagine that'd be difficult because like being in an area that's like very homogenous and then wanting to do the self exploration, how did you find outlets for that?
Hmm. I don't think I really did. I think I just started to kind of take note of how it bothered me.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think that started to shape my thinking around what type of school I wanted to teach in, where I wanted to teach, what kind of teacher I wanted to be.
Hmm.
And it was like I couldn't use that till I was done with school almost.
Right.
Um,
You were
but it,
committed to staying at that school. There was never a part of you that's like, I may leave Washington, I may leave this school or transfer and do something else.
I mean, just that freshman year. And then
Yeah.
after that, I was committed to staying because I felt like once I got more into my program, it was really the reason why I went there. They have a great teaching program. And then I was able to surround myself with friends that had kind of like similar ideals, so I could be myself with them in the larger setting of the school. It still wasn't a diverse
Cool.
group of friends, but our thinking was diverse.
Right, right. That makes a difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you graduated, did you go straight into teaching?
Yeah, I did. I graduated in May of 2003. Um, and I think I got hired for my first teaching job in the beginning of July that same year.
Right.
And I had it set in my mind and my heart that I wanted to teach kindergarten for the rest of my life. So funny. Um, so there weren't a lot of teaching jobs then, and um, there was a opening at a school where I actually knew the principal. My mom worked for her,
Mhm.
and I just loved her. I was like, she's amazing. Like I want to work there. And they only had a half-time kindergarten position. So I decided to apply, and then I was offered the position. And even though I knew I couldn't afford to live on a half-time first year teacher salary,
Mhm.
I decided to live at home with my parents for that year. Um, and teach half time. And then I did a little bit of subbing in the afternoons to make a little extra money. And I think it was a good way to start because it was like, I don't know, you're 22, you're an adult, but you're not really an adult. And
Right.
um, yeah, that year at home I think was really important transition for me.
Yeah. Can you tell me more about your experience with teaching, even from then to now? Because I feel like I've seen so much online in the news, even like TikToks of teachers who are talking about how difficult the experience is and how difficult it is to like manage classrooms, especially in 2023 when there's cell phones and vapes and everything else.
Hmm.
What has your experience been like? Have you seen it change over the course of time? And like, just what is your experience of being a teacher in this society that we're in?
Yeah. So I haven't been a teacher for the last 11 years. I've been a school
Okay.
principal. Um, so I taught kindergarten and then first grade and then second grade. And then I was like a um, academic interventionist, is what it was called, while I was going to school to become a principal.
Hmm.
So I worked with small groups of kids, and I also did my internship um, at the school that I had been working at for the last 8 years. And then I became an assistant principal at another school, and then a principal. So it's been 20 years since I started, and then I taught for 9 and was an administrator for 11.
Cool.
And now I left the career recently. Um, so your question about like what's my experience teaching, I have to go back, 11 years. So I can say that teaching now is completely different than when I started 20 years ago.
Mm.
I
How
mean,
so? Yeah.
like the demand on teachers, or really anybody in education, is so heightened. And it, you're essentially, as a teacher, trying to do something that's impossible. Like they're asking you to do something that's not possible with not enough resources. So I think the pandemic really impacted obviously everyone. But I have friends that are still teachers and I have friends that are still principals, and they talk about the kindergartners that have come in
Hmm.
um, that don't have basic hygiene routines for themselves. Like they're not out of diapers, and parents that think that's okay to send your kindergartner to school in a diaper. And I'm not talking about kids that have developmental delays or anything like that. It's just um, there's a certain level of like kids coming in without knowing, like the biggest thing I think is the socialization. It's
Mm.
really challenging for kids coming into schools right now. That they don't have social skills.
Mhm.
And it's not to say, like, I don't want to say, oh, these kids know nothing or they don't. I don't feel like that at all. I just feel like they haven't had the opportunity um, to grow in ways that other kids have. And that's, that's kids coming in. But then you think about kids that are in fifth grade and you think about how each of the years of their elementary school experience has been so different.
Mhm.
So we have this set of expectations that hasn't shifted. And we're living in a completely different society than we were pre-COVID.
Right.
Um, Not to mention that teachers get thrown under the bus all the time. Like, it's an attack on public education right now. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, banning books, and you can't talk about gender issues, and you can't
Mhm.
teach Black history. And I mean, I can't imagine being in a classroom. And thankfully, Washington is a little bit different, but it's still happening in Washington too. Um, I can't imagine being in a classroom full of kids of color. I mean, in my school where I was a principal, you might have one or two white students in a classroom of 25 to 28. So
Mhm.
primarily students of color. And you're not allowed to show them books that represent who they are. I mean, that right there would be enough for me to say I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah. And where is I guess where are the restrictions coming from? Is it within the school district? Is it state laws? Are parents petitioning? Like how did it get to that point?
I think
Or
it's
is it yeah.
all of the things that you mentioned.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the loudest voices are the ones who get things done, and the loudest voices are conservative white supremacists right now. I mean,
Yeah.
really. So I would say something that you see across the country is shifting of school board members. So
Mhm.
they get elected on certain platforms that resonate with people that don't really know the full story sometimes, and then school boards can put in place policies and procedures to limit
Mhm.
what's happening in the school district.
Got it.
And
And is
then
that
think
yeah,
about at the
sorry.
state level too. I mean, Florida is the example of kind of at the state level what's happening. But yeah, I think it's all kind of levels of that.
And do you think it's like I saw so much like new awareness, new information, especially as new generations like start to age up and be more involved in politics and just the social conversation. It's like we're introducing a lot of relatively new ideas, although they're not new. It's just like there's more voices speaking them, new ideas about diversity into the conversation. So is it a resistance within the schools to change and bring in these new ideas, or are they actually like taking things out of the schools as well to kind of align with this other position?
I think it's both, and I think for most, I don't want to say for most, but I think for a lot of educators, you lean a little bit more democratic because I mean, public education is like one of the founding things of of a democracy, right? And so
Mhm.
it's I mean, of course, there's educators that don't think that way, but I don't see you as an educator looking at your students and knowing that one of them is, potentially um, binary or non-binary or transgender, and like you not wanting to read a book about that, so I think it's like it's not coming from
Mhm.
teachers or principals necessarily, it's coming from the outside. And if you yeah, it's really about white supremacy, and this ideal that like we can't teach something from another perspective other than
Mhm.
white.
And it just seems like the identity has become more of a conversation, from what I've observed, even in the past 2 or 3 years, but definitely probably longer than that. And
Hmm.
when we're within the school system, and it's your experience over the past 20 years, how have you seen, and I even think like the bullying conversation has like changed this and it's allowed more space for identity and expression. How have you seen the lives of students change, and what their experience has been like in schools from when you started to now?
Yeah, I mean, I worked only in elementary school, but I know a lot of students that are, middle school and high school. As they aged out of my school, they'd come back to visit.
Hmm.
And what I see in those kids that I never saw in myself at that age is like a freedom to be who they want to be, but also having to fight to be who they want to be. So it's like in
Hmm.
some circles, their identity is accepted, and in some, it's not. So, whereas when I grew up, now I sound like a really old person. I am kind of, but when I grew up, like I didn't know anybody in high school that would come out as gay,
Hmm.
and you would hear slurs used all the time.
Right.
Um, and I think like where I live in the schools that I've worked in, like it is more accepted and talked about. And I think I've seen a lot of kids feel comfortable, being who they are. But that's not everywhere in the country, so, and that's not at every school every day.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I see that shift happening, even like I haven't been in a school since I was in school, but I watch like TV shows that are coming out that are new and they have high school kids, and there is so much more freedom of self-expression. And
mhm,
so there are parts of society and media that are promoting that and are good, and they're reinforcing this acceptance of others regardless of differences.
mhm,
And it's just interesting to see how it plays out in schools, which are politicized, because it scares people and it rubs them the wrong way and it puts them on their defenses.
right. Yeah. I mean, I'm just started a book that's called White Rage, and so it comes to my mind thinking about every time there's a step forward in terms of inclusion and accepting of diversity and shifting from a white dominant perspective to a different perspective, there's a backlash. So if you look at
Hmm.
in history, so like we're like, everybody thought when Obama, not everybody, but a lot of people thought when Obama was elected and then reelected, like we had arrived, as like
Hmm.
a new America. And then look at who was elected next. So it's like
Right.
that's the backlash for the progress.
Right.
So I see that in schools too, like a certain group of people that have always had control, they feel like they're losing control, and that's what they're doing is trying to take it back.
Right. And at the sake of the freedom and development of children who really
Right,
have nothing to do with someone else's feelings of control and identity with control.
right.
I'm curious about your experience, because you mentioned like you didn't feel like you had as much freedom for self-expression in your school years than kids now. How has that changed for you, and have you done what sort of like been your experience with, I guess, self-discovery and expression?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I was going to say that I think is different, that I see as different for especially the female students that I see now, some of them just have a very different perspective on like how they want to live their lives. I feel like when I was in high school, it was all about the boy. Like,
Hmm.
are you going to get asked to homecoming? Are you going, like, our boy is going to pass you or no? Like, there's a lot of pressure of that. And I think there still
Hmm.
is that. But I also see this generation of young women that are like, you know what? I don't have time for a boyfriend. Like, I could care less. And
Right.
even kids in college. So um, I think that's a way that, like, I felt very pressured by that in high school and college. Um, the beginning of college. So I think that's a way that it shifted. But your question was, what have I done to can you ask it one more time?
Yeah, well, just asking like thinking about that and like students who are feel like just more free to focus on themselves and to like figure out who they are. What has your experience been like
Mm.
in self-discovery and self-expression?
Yeah. So it's so interesting because I'm in the midst of like the probably my biggest life transformation I've ever had, and I'm 42. Um, I decided in June that I was going to resign from the school district I worked in for 20 years and leave the
Hmm.
career of being a school principal. Um, I was really suffering from really intense burnout, which led to a lot of anxiety and depression and like poor physical and mental health. And I started going to therapy about a year and a half ago. And through therapy is when I started to realize that I wasn't showing up authentically as myself in most spaces in my life.
Mm.
That I had literally gone from being in college, like being in high school in my parents' house, to being in college, to then being a teacher. And this idea of how can I be perfect? How can I be what everybody else wants me to be?
Hmm.
I put on myself every single day. And so it's really hard for me to be vulnerable. I mean, now it comes a lot easier. It still
Hmm.
catches in my throat a little bit, but I think I lived my life thinking that I had to be a certain way, I had to be a certain person, I had to achieve a certain thing by a certain time. I mean, I think we most of us kind of do that.
Hmm.
Um, but right now, after deciding to leave my job and take some time off, like I didn't know what I was gonna do for a job, and I never would have thought in a million years I could take that chance. Um, but I knew that if I stayed in that position, I would never figure out who I really was or what I really wanted. And
Hmm.
I would be living a life that I didn't even recognize. Um, so I think to to more pointedly answer your question is my pathway of self-discovery really didn't happen until I was 40, 41.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I have a number of friends who are the same age or within a couple of years, and we're all kind of going through that. And so it's really kind of sad to me to think that for 20, 25 years of your life, you potentially don't know who you are and you're just like going through the motions and you think you're living authentically, but you may not be.
Mm-hmm.
So I try not to focus on like how much I didn't do that and like be so thankful that I'm not still in that mode, because
Right.
now I feel like so much freedom. Um, I know who I am. I know what I don't want, and I'm now not willing to sacrifice myself for something that harms me, even though like I loved being a principal. I loved it. And so that's the part that breaks my heart, is I had to let go because I knew it wasn't good for me.
Right.
But I mean, I was good at it. and I
Yeah.
and I loved it. So,
I think you mentioned burnout, and I think the work can cause burnout, and I think there's an interesting aspect of burnout that comes with when we're having to put on a social mask and exist in this as this person that may not be authentically us. It does become exhausting. And then even if we don't have that part figured out just yet, it's like it's like showing up to go swimming every day when really you just want to like be laying down, in a beach lounger. It's like, why am I doing this? And feeling like I have to, and becoming exhausted doing it, like being a swimmer when I'm not a swimmer. And like then finally just stopping and like letting the dust settle enough to take that time for self-reflection. And because when we're working, we're having to pay bills, go to things, we have responsibilities. It's hard to have the time and space to do that.
mhm. Yeah, and
So what? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
recognize that that job, being pretty high paying job, afforded me the ability to take some time off right now. So I
Yeah.
recognize the privilege in that. And I feel like it's really, really horrible that we live in a society that says you start working when you come out of college or high school, and then you hopefully get to retire. It's like,
Right.
I would actually like to live my life between those times. So,
Right.
and I think my generation and younger generations are kind of pushing back on that ideal. Um, just with like the movement to work remotely, or to have a hybrid model, or to not work 40 hours a week. Like,
Hmm.
who decided 40 hours a week should be the baseline? That kind of a thing. So, anyway, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I love that for you. I've done I've experienced that a couple of times, because when I get done with something, I will just quit. Like I've quit a couple corporate jobs. I own my own businesses, and I stopped doing that because I get to a point where I'm like, I am exhausted and I'm feeling like I'm losing touch with myself, and I
Mhm.
desperately need the time and space to just be myself and act how I want to act and respond how I want to respond without the pressure of work. And
Mhm.
in America, it's extremely hard to do. I was living in New York City. There's no way I could live there without
Wow.
having to work and pay rent and all these things, which is why I'm in Bali, Indonesia right now, which is why I
Mm.
moved here, just to be able to have and afford the time and space for myself.
Mhm.
And so, with the time and space that you've allowed yourself, what have you learned? What has it been like?
Yeah. So it was really, really scary, and I don't think I could have made that choice without being in therapy. Um, because I was able to see through therapy, like, how much what I was doing was impacting me. And the last year of my job, I wasn't at a school. Um, my school had closed. We went through a school closure the year before. So during the pandemic, trying to close a beloved school. And then I took a job as a principal on special assignment, working at the central office. So I think between therapy and like slowing down a little bit, I started to like realize like oh, I don't feel good. Like
Mhm.
I am living so far from how I want to live that I don't even recognize myself. And I think that kind of comes from like when you're climbing in a career, you're focused on the climb
Mhm.
and where you want to get. And then you get there and you're like, okay, well, I still don't feel full. I still have a void. So I think
Mhm.
that's a little bit what I went through too. Like I thought when I got to what I was working towards and I got good at it, I could like take it easy or something, like
Yeah.
coast for a little bit or feel fulfilled and focus on something else. And that's not the case at all in that job and probably not any job. Um, and so, yeah, so through therapy, I realized that I was defining myself by my job. And, my therapist even asked, who are you? Like, who is Andrea?
Mhm.
I couldn't even respond. So it was very uncomfortable. It was tears and, probably 2 months of trying to answer that question.
Mhm.
So then having this time off, that's been a really big focus for me. Who am I without anything else attached?
Mhm.
And I think I'm starting to know who I am. And I like the person that I am right now. And the other thing that this time has afforded me is presence in everything that I'm doing as much as I can. So, on the weekends when I was working so much, I would have, you know, I would have a hard time doing social things, but I would have every other minute like planned out to efficiency. So it was like, okay, if I have to get groceries, it's gonna take me 10 minutes to get there. I'll spend 20 minutes there and I'll drive home. It was just like
Mhm.
every minute was planned and scheduled. And I would find myself, my heart racing, driving to the grocery store on a Sunday. So I was just in this like hyper adrenaline state all the time.
Mhm.
Um, and now I'm really focused on being present in the moment. Uh, so it's really changed my relationships, not just with
Yeah.
myself, but with my partner and with my family members. Um, I've had a number of people say to me, like, you're just so different. Your energy is different. And I, at first, that kind of struck me like, oh, I thought I showed up as like everything was fine all the time because I was trying to hide how I was feeling.
Yeah.
Um, so it struck me as like kind of made me uncomfortable. And then I was like, no, just be proud because the energy you're giving off right now is the real you.
Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and then, I took this leap, like not knowing what I was going to do for a while. And then I stumbled across becoming a life coach.
Mhm.
And that's where I connected with you through that program.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I have a lot of hopes and dreams about that working out. And I feel like I have a new purpose um,
Mhm.
that builds on what I spent 20 years doing. Um, I'm, starting to practice working with clients, and I can use the skills that I developed as a principal and as a teacher in life coaching. And that experience is really helpful in that area. And it's really building on my strengths, but
Mhm.
could provide me with the self directed work and freedom and space that I'm really craving. So I'm working hard I know it's going to be hard to build my own business, but I also, I'm not afraid of hard work. I just don't want work that's sacrificing me. day in and day
Yeah,
out.
totally. What advice would you give for someone who's in a long-term career, has been very committed to a career, but is in that boat of feeling like, am I really being myself? Like, I would like, or and who would want to get to know themselves more and maybe hesitant to take that next step or worried about leaving a career. What advice would you give?
Um, yeah, so one of the things that really helped me was putting it into perspective. So, uh, what would happen if you leave it? And really thinking through the facts or the worries of what would happen if you leave that job. And then
Mhm.
thinking about, and what would happen if you stay? And for me, that second question was really easy to answer. What would happen if you
Mm,
stay? I knew exactly what that would do to my health, to my relationships, to the internal me. And
mhm,
I remember it was my therapist that said, so those are both scary, but one is known and one is unknown.
mhm.
And the other one is not more scary, it's just unknown.
Yeah,
And so I think putting it into perspective can be helpful. And then also, I look back on my own role in the burnout and in the frustration. And now that I'm out of it, I can see ways that I could have taken control and been a healthier version than I was. But when I was in it, I felt like it's just out of my control, kind of like a victim stance.
mm, mhm,
And I feel like when you're in it, it's hard to see it. So I guess my advice would be, if there's any way for you to either one, hit pause and, you know, obviously there's privilege that comes with being able to do that, but like take a 6-week medical leave or 4 weeks or 2 weeks or like some way to hit pause to really look at how your job is impacting you in a holistic way. And then the other thing is, how can you reach out and get support in going through that decision making process of what's next? So
yeah,
like therapist or life coach, or if that's not accessible, even a trusted friend or mentor.
yeah,
Because I think a lot of times we suffer in silence
for
because
sure.
we have that mask on. Like even my
Yeah,
closest friends, I would not talk to them about how miserable I was.
yeah. And that's like that. I think the vulnerability comes from the ability to be vulnerable comes from, I guess, the esteem we get when we are being ourselves and we are just comfortable with who we are.
Hmm.
And I like that you said, or that you kind of spoke about reflection and like taking that time for self-reflection, because as life coaches, like that's one of the biggest things that we have to ask our clients is to be open to feedback and like giving ourselves feedback.
Yeah.
I'm curious what ways that you're able to cope with the uncertainty of, like you mentioned, have that the both options were scary, but one was just unknown. So like how did you cope with the unknown or the uncertainty of the unknown?
Hmm. It took me a really long time to figure it out. And I haven't thought about this for a while, so I have to think. I think I just got to a point where I said, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Mm,
Like I know that this is going to cause me things that I don't want in my life. And
Mhm.
I think I have shifted my thinking a lot to, I don't know, because I've always been in my life thinking about the worst case scenario.
Mhm.
So, like, if there's even when I was like in high school and stuff, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail this test, I'm gonna get a bad grade, I won't get into college, then I'll have to live at home the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Like my brain, and I don't know if that's everybody's, but that's pretty much my whole life how things function. And even as a successful principal, I think that's part of what helped me be successful, because I could think 2, 3 steps ahead of a decision, big or small, and avoid disaster, but that's
Mhm.
not how you should live your life, I think now. So I have been able to shift my thinking to, it's still a what if, but it's like, what if it worked?
Mhm.
Like, what if I follow my passion and my heart and what my body is telling me, and I work really hard and it works, and I get the life that I've always wanted?
Right. Well, I
Because,
like that you said like what your body's telling you
yeah.
because our instincts will say something, but one thing and our minds will say another.
Hmm.
Can you I think I interrupted you, but can you talk more about that too?
Yeah. I think that my instincts have always been right. And where that train of thinking, that like catastrophizing, that's like your mind, that's your brain like leading the way. Um, and so I don't ever, when I made that big decision, or I make any decision right now, I'm never 100% like, oh, this feels good. Like, no. But it's enough, it's leaning that way enough that I have faith in it.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think has helped me change, is I started meditating last January. And right now it's almost every day. It hasn't been that way for the whole year. Um, but when I was working so much and I was so overwhelmed and stressed, the idea of sitting with myself for 10 minutes or 15 minutes was like so uncomfortable,
Mhm.
because there was so much stuff that I was pushing down that you have to deal with if you're quiet.
Mhm.
So I think through a meditation, and I don't know if it's for everybody, and I think we have this ideal of like sitting on a mat and it's perfectly calm and all of that. Like meditation is just stopping and listening to yourself, is how I define it.
Mhm.
Um, but I think I was not connected to my body or my heart and my soul, my inner self
Mhm.
at all. So making scary, like not scary, but making decisions where the outcome is unknown feels safer than it used to, because it's coming from, yeah, it's coming from me. It's coming from the internal me, and not an inauthentic me or external view of me.
Right. I love that. And it's like the when you start doing it, it feels like you're testing things like, oh, could this really work? Is this real? And then the more you do it, like trusting your instincts and just following faith really, like the more used to it you get that things will work out and you don't have to like hold so tight onto the control.
Yeah. Yeah. I just had a therapy yesterday, and and somewhere in there I was saying like, I feel like I'm holding things in the palm of my hand versus like squeezing it in my hand and
Yeah.
letting it go through the grip. Like that analogy really resonates with how I feel right now. Um, Yeah, and I feel like
Right.
so much more control over my direction of my life. Um,
Yeah.
and I might, in 6 months be like, well, this isn't working. I need to shift gears. And I actually am okay with that because this time is just part of my journey. Like leaving that job and taking this time and doing this program to become a life coach is part of my journey. Whether I fulfill all my dreams related to that or not, it's going to lead me to the next part of my journey. So I don't have a sense of like there's failure at the end. There might be different path, but that's okay.
Right. Yeah, that's great. That's the mind, like it's totally all about the mindset shift.
Hmm.
What would you, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and the only person that can do that is you. So
Yeah.
that's I think where that's so hard. And for me to
Yeah.
get to that mindset shift has been painful work, and for many
Mhm.
years I was like, nope, not going to do that, not going to go to therapy, not going to look at that. Um and so that's what kept me stuck. But
That's really interesting. I feel like a lot of people think either like they're not going to do a thing, they're not going to therapy, or they don't want to because they know that there's like things to be worked on and they just don't want to do the work.
mhm.
Do you have advice about for people who are I've spoken with other people in the podcast about this, like releasing that ego mindset and really being able to recognize that some of the things we say and do and think aren't us and it's coming from an ego place that's preventing us from like being vulnerable or learning more about ourselves and moving forward. Do you have advice for someone who may be coming from that ego mindset of I've got this and I don't need to like or are reluctant to reach out for help of like what you've experienced?
Yeah, it's so hard because I think you have to get to your own place of decision making, but I think if if you can find a way to be really honest with yourself even a little bit, it's like looking at the two scenarios. I mean, for me it was like either I can stay in pain and have no hope of getting to the other side, or I can say I need help with this because I can't figure this out on my own, and that's okay. And I'm still going to
Hmm.
have pain, but I'm not going to be doing it alone. And so that for me is how I finally, and I've gone to therapy a couple other times, but I hated it. Um, I don't think I had the right therapist.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I think it's just like finding a way to make a decision about what kind of pain do you want to have, the productive
Yeah,
kind or the one that keeps you where you are and you're just going to keep coming back.
right. Like eventually you will be tired of going in the circle or the spiral of the same thing over and over.
Yeah. And I just got to a place where I just felt so far from where I wanted to be. Um and I didn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah. If you could give any advice to your younger self, knowing what you know now, what would it be?
Hmm. Probably so many things, but um I think one of the things that I would want to tell her is you get to define what success looks like for yourself. Because that's been something I've been really working on is success to me right now is probably 90% about internal value. And I would say even 8 months ago, 6 to 8 months ago, it was probably 90% about how, like, external ideas of success.
Yeah.
And I think I would also tell her there's no such thing as perfect. Like, that word doesn't exist. And so you're not going to achieve anything by trying to be perfect, except for pain and frustration.
That's good advice.
Yeah. And like the last thing I think I would say to her is, like, it's kind of hard to say, but like, you are a whole, beautiful, wonderful human being. Just you.
Hmm.
Like, you don't need anyone else to validate who you are. You don't need anything to validate who you are. You don't need a title next to your name to validate who you are. You're an amazing person, just you.
Yes, the intrinsic value of self.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Andrea. This has been really great conversation.
Yeah. I feel like taking me back to like kind of childhood, college days. I haven't really thought about how that path shaped some of the decisions I've made recently, you know?
Yeah. Yes, I was actually talking about that as well. Like when we look back, we can see it's hard to see it in the moment, but when we look back, we can see what decisions kind of shaped our timelines.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to because it's like the puzzle pieces come together way later, and like even when something bad happens to us or we're going through struggles and overcoming obstacles and we think why is this happening and there's no reason for it in the moment, and it could
Mhm.
be years before it makes sense, but eventually it all does make sense.
Yeah, and I think if you don't process through it, it becomes this like monster in the closet. But what I've noticed is if I process through those things, I can see the blessings in them, and they're not scary. They're actually, I don't, it sounds cheesy, but they are. I do feel like those things are gifts to me now.
Yeah, no, yeah,
Because,
that's beautiful.
yeah, and because they got me to where I am today, you know?
Hmm.
So anyway, we'll see what I feel like in 6 months, but I just I have this newfound sense of hope, and like we were talking about the mindset shift of like, what if
Yeah,
it actually works? Like, I just love saying that to myself now.
yeah, and no matter what, really, it will be working because it it's not life or death, hopefully.
Right.
And if it doesn't work out in the way you thought, doesn't mean it's not necessarily working out. So that's kind of the amazing thing.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like this kind of new purpose I found, tying it into, how to have a career, is it's helping others as well, which is
Hmm.
my whole point of being in education in the first place. Um, but I don't want to help others and sacrifice myself. I want to
Exactly.
be a whole person and help others. So,
Love that. Boundaries.
yeah, yes, so hard, but so
I
important.
know. I'm
Yeah.
working on it too. It feels so good though. I love setting boundaries now.
Hmm.
All
Yeah. I
right.
I have had to set some boundaries with people in my life, and what's so interesting is one person in particular now will be like, well, I set a boundary with her and I wanted to tell you because I was so proud. So it's kind of like it's teaching in a way too, where it's like, oh, I taught you through my example and now you did it yourself. Like, I love that. So
Yes. Well, being able to talk about it too is a part of the vulnerability, because instead of being like, "Oh, everything's okay and I'm fine," and like, being able to say, "Hey, that bothered me. I'm setting a boundary, not doing it again," communicating it, because I don't like confrontation and have had to learn how to speak for myself and speak up for myself without just isolating or running away and being like, But yeah, but the boundaries are contagious.
yeah, yeah, I love it. Yeah. Well, when does
Cool.
your podcast come out? And like, does it, is there a way I can access it or?
Yes. So the first episode will air this Sunday,
Oh, cool.
and episodes will come out once a week, every Sunday. It's at noon for me here in Bali, so I think it'll be like midnight Eastern, and like however the time differences go.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
every Sunday it'll come out. Um, I think you are like number 9, so your episode will be probably the first week of February, if I'm counting correctly.
Okay. And it's on Spotify.
Yes, it's on Spotify. I'm still considering if I will do it on like Apple Music, and like I could put it on everything, but I might keep it just on Spotify to start.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I will
that's
send
awesome.
links, and I will ask for a profile photo, or like just a photo of you, because I'm using photos of the guests for each episode, like little icon.
Okay.
But we can cross that bridge when we come to it,
Hmm.
since you have a bit more time before your episode comes out. But I'll reach out again and ask
Yeah.
for that, and then I will send links when everything's out, and you're welcome to share. I would love if you shared. But yeah, I'm really excited. The Sundays, day one.
Cool. Well, congratulations. It's something I mean, I love listening to podcasts. So when I saw your post and I've been trying to just do more things I would usually say no to, I was like, let me just like, I don't think I'm that interesting, but um, let me try it. So thanks for
Well,
the
you're in
opportunity.
great company, and I love the conversation we had, especially with you being a teacher. I feel like that's a voice that I haven't had on, and you will relate to a lot of people, so
Hmm.
it'll be really good.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good day or night or so. I don't know.
Yeah, it's 10 a.m. for me.
Okay.
I'm
It's
gonna
six
go get
o'clock
some
at
rest.
night here. It's super dark and cold. So
Oh yeah. All
yeah.
right, enjoy your evening.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us today. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and join us in our next conversation, where we'll be exploring the extraordinary lives of ordinary people. I'm Courtney Lofton, and this is Ordinary Eccentrics.